Thank you, Kerry. I thought I'd clicked it. I must have just missed it. But good evening, welcome to the stream. We'll do all that again. I was just saying in mime that thank you for your indulgence with kind of moving over to the Saturday this week. I know it's a little bit of a it goes one way or the other, Friday or Saturday on random occasions. But yesterday was so frigging hot, so today's a lot more tolerable. It's a lot more comfortable. So yeah, it's a better evening for it today. I'm just going to change the colour temperature on this bloody thing. That's better. I don't quite look like I'm being whited out now. Has anyone seen Top Gun or Jurassic World yet? No, don't want to see either. I have absolutely no desire to see the new Top Gun film. Not even in the slightest. If someone sort of suggested that or watch Frozen Scream, I'd probably watch Frozen Scream, to be honest with you. To be honest, I'm not that big a fan of the original. I enjoyed it well enough back in the day, but it's a film I just feel dated horribly, and I pick up on political tones on that film that I don't particularly enjoy. But there you go. Kerry says it's pretty cool here. Would say about 10 degrees. It's about 19 degrees outside. It's only about 23 in here today, so it's very comfortable, which is good because it was like about 32, 33, 34 in here last night. Until quite late, it was uncomfortable. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people like the Top Gun film. Definitely not for me. Definitely not for me. But talking about... I was going to say talking about films. Of course we're talking about films. As some of you might notice, if you looked on the Ramblaholics, there has been... I mean, it's been mooted for a while. It's been put out there for a little while, but there's a new release of I Spit on Your Grave. So before we get into the Jess Franco marathon, well, just talk for a few minutes about that, maybe half an hour about that. But I have two versions of this film, right? So they're bringing out this new version, and I'll just flip over to that. We have the technology, folks. So this is the new 3-disc collector's 4K edition of I Spit on Your Grave. I thought it was going to be like a collection box, but it's not. It's basically the first film plus 2 discs of extra, so there's a fuck ton of stuff on there. In that respect, it might actually be worth picking up, but this is still a cut version, and that's a real problem still, I think. The BBFC have a very strange attitude to this film. I have mentioned it in the past. I did actually talk to the BBFC webmaster about this movie when I was writing my dissertations. And their attitude back then was pretty severe, and their attitude towards it now is still pretty bad, I think, because I do not think the film is characterised in the way it is the way that they characterise this film. I think it's kind of a little bit bizarre, to say the least, some of their opinions on this film. But we will have a quick look at what their opinion is in just a moment. So I'm going to show you basically... I'm going to show you the two versions that I have. I have had other versions, but these are the two versions that I have, right? So there is the Elite Edition, which is the US Uncut Region 1. And that's a really good version. It has the Miyazaki and Bob Briggs commentary, which is interesting, actually. You know, Bob Briggs is... not the first person I would think to kind of cover a film like this, because, you know, he tends to be quite light-hearted about it, and he is where he can be in this film. But it's it's a bit of an odd one. But hearing the director's opinion on this film as he goes through it was actually kind of interesting. So if you can get hold of a version with the director's commentary on it, it's really good. Now, this, more importantly and more relevantly, I believe this was a 2001 version that's on here. I basically got this version because it's got Don't Mess With My Sister on it. But I'm also kind of interested in seeing these cut versions and seeing what the BBFC and the distributors actually kind of do with this. Now, I was going to make a video on kind of what the cuts are. Now, the cuts are almost exclusively in the first half of the film. During the obvious scenes, the most extreme version of the cuts completely omits the attack on the rock. So you don't really get to see any of that part of it. And the first attack that happens is... but the original cut, I think the original BBFC cut was about 7 minutes short. Now, in this version at least, there's a lot of substitutions. So the runtime is not actually representative of the actual movie, if you know what I mean. So what you see in here is a lot of kind of cutbacks to some more neutral reactions from the guys, and a lot of reframing and avoiding certain shots. And it would cut back to the same shot. There's a little, like, you know, it's about 1.5 seconds reaction shot which gets played like about 4 times in that sequence. It's very, very distracting. And I talked to when I did talk to the BBFC, I kind of pointed out that a lot of these cuts were damaging in a way that it's it detracts from the power of the scene. It almost makes it a spectacle where they're trying to get rid of a spectacle, if you know what I mean. And they were like, oh, well, it's none of our business. You know, it's down to the distributors to do, which is not entirely true, because the BBFC often have historically done cuts themselves. So, yeah. Richard says, I expect Grave is a good film, but yeah, the 2 rape scenes were a bit much. I mean, it's 3 in that. So you got the initial attack, the one on the rock, and a couple of attacks at the house. But yeah, it's a tough film. I completely, you know, agree with the BBFC in terms of it's a very difficult film. I completely understand why people back in the 80s, particularly with the political landscape that was around them, struggled with that film. But just to dismiss it as, I think they called it, a nasty piece of entertainment, which I thoroughly disagree with. But with that said, let's go have a quick look at the BBFC's response, or at least their case study, which is, it's going to be a little bit out of date now, obviously, because this new version's coming out and stuff. But in fact, actually, let's have a quick look at the cuts before we do that. Right. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. So I'll tell you what I'll try and do is let's... Okay, alright, okay. So this is the Melon Farmers website, and it has all the various different cuts and stuff. So we'll start off at the bottom, right? Okay. Released uncut on preset VHS for Wizard Astra, and it was listed as a video nasty. We all know that. Ended up on the DVP 39. Then we kind of fast forward to, does it have the date on there? 2001, 2005. Now, I'm not sure which version this is. Screen Entertainment. Okay, yeah. So this would be the, I think this is the 2005, probably. Okay. BBFC commented on the cuts. Compulsory cuts were required to remove several sequences of sexual violence and humiliating depictions of female nudity in line with published sexual violence guidelines. Yeah, I would argue the point on that, to be honest with you. I think there was a whole bunch of stuff on there. They actually kind of had a problem with a lot of the reactions from the guys and stuff like that. And not only that, just because of the way the camera was sort of placed, that makes it look like you're actually participating in the attack, which I kind of think is, it's kind of an important dynamic in the movie. But there you go. All cuts to the gang rape scenes, no cuts in the revenge section. And that's the experience that I had. So essentially, they called it an exploitation film, and it's like the half of the movie that is exploitation, which is the second half of the film, is the bit that they kind of went, nah, that's fine, that's fine. The non-exploitative part, the first part, is the bit that they didn't. But yeah, I think if a man directed I Spit on Your Grave, it would have been massacred as a film, or done so well. Well, it was directed by a man, Miyazaki, unless I'm misreading you. I think you kind of. I don't know about the remake. Was it 2010 remake? So yeah. So the next one really kind of has the image, basically the Rock attack. So distributors claim that 7 minutes were restored prior to resubmission. This is not the case. So yeah, basically that was one of the kind of slightly cheap attempts that they did, where they kind of substituted a lot of stuff into the film in an attempt to make it look like it was actually cut less. But yeah, I think that is actually kind of like the version that's on here, come to think of it. The latest submission was pre-cut by the distributor, basically in line with the BBFC's 2001 cuts list. However, this time they decided to make the cuts differently. And yeah, frankly, thank God for that, because the earlier cuts of those things were absolutely shocking. It just absolutely breaks the film. Some of the cuts are made by reframing. Yeah, that's certainly in this version. Yeah, it means that certain sequences are previously cut are now partially present, albeit in a reframed version. So basically, there's like the shot looking down on Camille Keaton. She's being sort of pinned down by the guys, and it was kind of digitally zoomed into her face. And it's a huge change in quality as well, because obviously the resolution's not that particularly high, particularly on DVD at that time. So then we go up to next one. Company was required to make several cut scenes to sexual violence in order to remove potentially harmful material, and we'll sort of get back to that in a few minutes anyway. 2010, BBFC were asked to take another look at the film, carefully considered the cuts in 2001 and concluded that they were excessive. Yeah, that's actually in the case study about what it is that they thought was the problem. Partially, I agree. Although the cuts had successfully removed the eroticized elements of nudity, and this is the BBFC talking, they'd removed some of the horror of the rapes. You kind of like, I don't know what sort of person would actually, well, I guess you know what sort of person would sort of find that erotic, but I don't think the movie's going to be the catalyst for that, if you know what I mean. I don't think that is the sort of thing that a well-adjusted person would approach and think is fine, you know. Then in 2020, it was past 18 sexual violence, sadistic violence, nudity, with 1 minute and 41 seconds of cuts, and it's pretty much stayed the same up until now. I think the latest version is approximately the same in terms of the cuts as the 2020 version. So that's where we're kind of left with that. But this is the BBFC's case study, and it's an interesting little read, and I'll just try and skim through it as fast as possible. Miyazaki's notorious 1978 rape and revenge melodrama, which is an odd way of putting it, was never submitted to BBFC for cinema classification, but acquired notoriety in the 1980s as one of the most frequently prosecuted video nasties. Probably the reason why it got so much attention was because the newspapers were publishing its cover like every other week. But there you go. The film tells the story of New Yorker Jennifer Hills who takes a vacation in the countryside where she hopes to write a novel in the peace and quiet. Instead, she meets a group of local men who, after some initial horseplay, turn nasty and gang rape her 3 times. One member of the gang is left to kill Jennifer so that the men's crime would not be reported, but he's ultimately unable to go through with the murder. Jennifer subsequently visits each of the men, all but one of whom thinks she is dead. That's not true. They all actually kind of knew she was alive because Matthew kind of freaks out and blurts out that he didn't actually kill her. And kills him in a variety of brutal and inventive ways. Well, not really that inventive. I mean, most inventive was Matthew's death, probably. The rest of it was just like kind of brute force and ignorance, wasn't it, really? Transparent the Grave was formally submitted for classification as a video DVD in 2001. The film's presentation of sexual violence infringed the board's strict policy on rape and sexual violence, which states that where the portrayal eroticizes or endorses sexual assault, the BBFC is likely to require cuts at any classification level. And I've always disagreed with that assessment. If it's eroticizing or endorsing sexual assault, you're probably the kind of person that would actually, was predisposed to commit those kind of crimes. Now, it's arguable that BBFC would be kind of required to take that into consideration. But I would not say that the film eroticizes or endorses sexual assault. Could somebody watch it in that sort of sense? Possibly. And that's really the crux of the question. I don't think it would by today's standards, to be quite honest. It's not the sort of film that most people would flock to anyway. Although it was clear that the film would need to be cut quite significantly to make it acceptable, BBFC felt that by cutting the most eroticized elements of the rape, if it would be possible to preserve the simple narrative of the film, leaving enough straightforward violence in the killing scenes at the end to satisfy horror film fans. This is one of those things. I've always thought that they have such a strange, screwed up kind of a view of this particular movie. And that sort of sums it up, really. That, horror fans are not there for a story, a proper full-on story. That we're only there for the killing. Indeed, under the terms of the Human Rights Act, the BBFC is required to take a proportionate approach to any perceived dangers in her work. Article 10 of the European Convention of Rights guarantees freedoms of expression, but does allow restrictions to be placed on such freedoms, provided they're justified and proportionate. Now, that's some real kind of mealy-mouth legal language, isn't it, really? Those grey areas that the government sort of went, well, we think it's right. We think we're in the right. We think we're being justified and proportionate. There was a substantial body of research evidence that suggests that eroticized depictions of rape and sexual violence, that is, depictions of rape which because of their manner or presentation or visual details may sexually arouse rather than horrify. And I don't think it actually kind of falls into the eroticized depiction kind of category. May have a harmful effect on the attitudes and behaviours of some viewers. We've pretty much said that that's always going to be a risk, and certainly there's some rather vanilla films throughout history that have allegedly provoked some extreme reactions. But what you're going to do? However, rejecting a film outright would not be proportionate to the possible dangers. And you see, now they're kind of going, oh, well, we don't think it's necessarily that risky, but speaking out of both sides of the mouth a little bit on that one. I mean, censorship and all that kind of stuff and classification is always a fairly nuanced process. So dealing with that is all a bit kind of like, I don't know. But I think, they were kind of more concerned with the history of the film. I think that's a little bit of a hangover from Furman's days, to be quite honest, and this film in particular was notorious. BBFC felt that in parading and emphasising Jennifer's youthful nakedness during the rape scenes, she's beat up. Come on. Really? Am I really that far off the mark? I've got no idea. The film presented the sexual excitement of rape from a male perspective. No, it doesn't. You could certainly see it that way if you're kind of disposed to that sort of thing, but it is not what the film itself suggests, in my opinion. With a predisposition for enjoying non-consensual sex. Is it the film or is it the person? In total, 7 minutes 2 seconds of cuts were required before the work could be past 18. In 2010, BBFC was asked to take another look at the film 9 years after its previous classification. BBFC carefully considered the cuts made in 2001 and concluded they were excessive. No shit. Although the cuts had successfully removed the most eroticised elements of the nudity, which is what we just covered a minute ago, but they had also removed some of the horror of the rapes, most notably the scene in which Jennifer is raped over a rock, which had been deleted entirely. So the film is like a bunch of non sequiturs almost when you see it in that version. It's actually quite astonishing. On this occasion, it was concluded that any material that emphasised the horrors of sexual violence was not focusing principally on nudity could be reinstated. However, the moments that seem to focus on nudity in a prurient and exploitative manner, which I'm not sure any of it does, it's a lot of quicker cuts. Miyazaki really did kind of like hold the camera back for the most part. So ironically, it's a lot more kind of close up and in her face when they did the digital reframing. As well as moments that emphasised the enjoyment of the rapists were still subjected to cuts. And that's the thing, you see. In total, 2 minutes 54 seconds were cut into 2011. I think that's more or less what they've got on this version, as far as I can tell. So that's where we are. The rest of it goes on about the new remake, the 2010 remake. And that I think they actually have a lot more of a stick up their arse still than they're actually kind of letting on in there. They characterise the film in a very, very specific way. That I've, since I first saw the film, I would disagree with their assessment of it. It's not eroticised in any kind of normal way, and to some extent, there's always that thing that people can eroticise anything. And yes, there are rapists out in the world. That's just a matter of fact. They will find, there's no reason why they wouldn't go find, The Accused, the Jodie Foster film, or any number of rape revenge films. This film is probably one of the most nasty depictions of it. It really kind of is. There's a lot of grotesquity within this film, and it's by design. It's also shot very unusually. A lot of the nudity is a long shot. There's no music or anything. This is not a dramatic production in a normal Hollywood kind of way. It's a very sober film for the most part. Gets a bit batshit towards the end, but that's the bit they wouldn't touch. So I find that kind of fascinating. There we go. I think eventually it will kind of make it through. Possibly. But not in the near future. If there's one thing, the BBFC have been very persistent about this film. Very stubborn. Whereas they, Last House on the Left is probably one of the better examples of censorship history within the video nasties. And you see the to and fro that happened with that film until eventually it got pretty much uncut. Whereas I Spit on Your Grave has always struggled with it. And I suspect a lot of it is that the examiners have a hard time sitting down and watching that film. So, on top of its reputation as well, I think that is a real problem. I think eventually it'll manage to kind of justify itself. But the thing is, it's got so much writing and so much critical response to this film that the BBFC seem to flat out ignore, that I do wonder. I do wonder whether or not it will ever completely manage it, or whether people will just give up and just say go buy it from America. Yeah, just go get that version, or one of the current DVDs. But yeah, let's have a quick look. Sorry, because I have been ignoring the chat a little bit. So if anybody's asked me a question, then feel free to ask me again, because there is a lot of talk in the chat. I was going to mention that the movie has no extra diegetic music, which doesn't sensationalise the horror events and adds to the horror. It's a very, very quiet film. There's only 2 pieces of music within the whole thing, and one of them's the guy playing the harmonica. The other is her playing the record to cover Johnny's screams as he dies in the bathtub. See, that's one of the things. It's like you take the whole. I mean, I do kind of like say that the second half is a lot more exploitative, but there is sort of the 2 ends to this movie. There is this kind of. I can't see how a rapist would watch that movie and then think, oh well, clearly that was rather exciting. Oh, she's just cut his knob off. What the hell? Same here. It was a great time to grow up. We just had enough technology, but not too much. Oh, what, the 80s? Yeah. I'm just gonna quickly have a quick look up there, see if I've missed any. I'm gonna have to really scan through that really quick. Everett says Miyazaki was inspired to make the film. Yes, I do know that story. She later became his goddaughter. I didn't know that bit. See, the thing is, there's nothing about that film that kind of suggests to me that the director had any intention of glamorizing or eroticizing everything, and that's the fundamental thing I have a problem with the BBFC's assessment. I think it is an absolute slander upon Miyazaki to suggest that. I mean, I would be more understanding of their opinion if they were just like, look, we think that this can be kind of a problem for people of a certain nature. Although one would argue that should art be kind of governed by that kind of lowest common denominator, I don't think that's necessarily a healthy place to be. Saw a I Spit box set cut in HMV Blu-ray, £30. Yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to see this new version. I genuinely would. I'd kind of interested to see it just on the basis of understanding what got cut. That version, that English version that I got down there, not the first one. Like I say, I did have one other version, which was an earlier version before that. And it was almost unwatchable. Like I say, second half is not cut much at all. First half is just butchered, and distractingly so. You can't get into the movie. You can't really follow the movie in the same way. It's constantly yanking you out of the story, which I think was very, very counterproductive. And for BBFC to kind of like. When they talk about it being objectifying, I find that the cut that I had and the cut that's on there is far more objectifying, because it really sort of takes you away from the drama of what's going on, and kind of makes it a whole bunch of scenes with a bit of nudity, and it's far more objectifying in that kind of way, because you're not invested in the story in the same way. The whole film, video, nasty censorship thing is predicated on a belief that the great unwashed have no ability to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. It's a whole bunch of things, to be honest with you. One of the interesting examples throughout history of of censorship would be a film like Battleship Potemkin, and not specifically banned. It was allowed to be shown in certain film clubs, but as the story goes, when a working men's film club decided to watch this thing, they wanted to watch this thing, they were denied access to it. So there's a class thing going on apart from anything else. So there's political and class and the whole kind of like worrying about the great unwashed thing. It's so many elements which come in, but essentially it is about a sense of superiority apart from anything else. Now the BBFC are not as bad as that these days in certain terms. If you want to kind of like look at The Lady of Heaven, which was recently kind of came up as an issue, and the BBFC had a response to the calls for censorship of that, and then you get to see kind of like the role that the BBFC should have. I mean, it's rated as a 15. The groups that were protesting it most certainly kind of wanted to see it sort of go away because of blasphemy, and blasphemy laws, thankfully we don't have them anymore in Britain, and I wouldn't want to see them come back. It was one of the more ridiculous things. Dear. Some kids watch video nasties on VHS. Yes, they did. Yeah, absolutely they did. I saw Cannibal Holocaust and I Spit on Your Grave as a double bill. That's the first of the video nasties I saw. But it wasn't until a few years after that. But I was only like about 13 at the time. So I probably shouldn't have been watching it, but it didn't do me any harm. In fact, I probably wouldn't be doing a lot of what I do now and talking to you guys at the moment if I hadn't seen those films. Because it made me curious. I think with the video nasties, most people hadn't seen them, and many a myth was spun, making them in your mind much worse. Mainly just bad filmmaking. I would take a little exception to that. They were non-mainstream. Is a better way to say it. They were lower budget. They weren't Hollywood pictures. Some were bad. But there was a lot of good stuff in there as well. And a lot of what I would describe as socially important films as well. But because of the category that they were in, and nobody liked, nobody in power wanted to countenance the whole horror scene. They always felt it was very disgusting, basically. Prurient and all that kind of stuff. They failed to see that a lot of horror films, and including a lot in the video nasties, were either doing something important or at least kind of like trying to tell an interesting story. It's just they had a problem with the whole kind of idea of horror films. They always felt like those things were depraving and corrupting. Which is why it went through the Obscene Publications Act for such a long time, until the Video Recordings Act came along. Can't bring myself to watch Possession again. No, I love Possession. I think it's a fantastic film, but it's a kind of film that appeals to my sense of storytelling. It's a very psychological point of view. Deeply, deeply so, which is why it's so weird. It's basically a story told from a rather tortured mind. Death Wish 2 has its problems even to this day, even with the new 4K Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome. Actually had VS fans doing fan edits to cut out. Really? Wow. Okay. It's kind of central to that, but mind you, no. Death Wish 2 is a lot more frivolous than the first one, but yeah, even so. No one would defend Night of the Bloody Apes as an underappreciated work of art. No, but I wouldn't say it was a particularly offensive one either. It's not to say that there's not bad films in the Video Nasties list. I'm not defending every film that's on there. I mean, for every Cannibal Man, there's a Night of the Bloody Apes, or the ghastly ones. Censorship has given these films a sense of importance. That's something most films of this genre don't get. Yeah, to a degree, yeah. It immortalised them. And for me, when I kind of like learnt about all that stuff, I started getting much more kind of into finding out about these movies, what it is that they do, what is good. When I started doing this YouTube channel in particular, I started looking a lot more closely at those films. I found a lot of films that even if they weren't particularly good, I could appreciate. And that's kind of cool. In what other genre do you really get these kind of trashy little films that would otherwise have disappeared get preserved? So it is an unintended side of censorship, is that these things get attention, and certainly when it's done on such an industrial scale as the Video Nasties scare, that a lot of these films would have disappeared. They would have gone away. They would likely not be remembered. And it's something to say that, even in America, a lot of these films are kind of like known for the fact that they're on the Video Nasties list, and for no other reason. It's not because they're particularly classic. But yeah, a good example of a film that was considered to be complete trash by the authorities, but it is actually a very smart film to the point that I actually kind of consider it an art house film, would be Driller Killer. Yeah, Abel Ferrara's notorious classic debut film. Well, not quite his debut film, but shall we say in the more acceptable genres. Even if Driller Killer, and horror is not really an acceptable genre, generally speaking, it is a lot more than porn, because the one he did before, at least one of the ones he did before, was 9 Lives of Wet Pussy. And it's amazing how many of the directors actually kind of did have a porn career before their big films. Wes Craven, even. When we pulled our resources to watch back in the 80s, it was a bit of a disappointment. Which one was that then? Death Wish 2. Yeah. I don't know if... I know Death Wish 2 at the time, Kieran, certainly, around its release, definitely got a hard time. Michael Winner was getting a lot of hard rides from the BBFC for a long time, and the Death Wish films were contentious with the BBFC, particularly back in the day. Don't know if it's uncut now. We'd have to look that up. One of my friends paid £10 to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre when he was a kid. With a bunch of other kids. £10 per kid at his mate says. There was a certain amount of that. The government were constantly kind of like going, kids are having watch parties, which I don't think was as prevalent as they would kind of state in it. But yeah, kids were watching those things. Parents didn't really know how to handle it. They weren't kind of aware of their responsibilities. It's arguable that these days they're not. Which is a bit of a, it's a bit of a problem, that considering it was like 1976 on that the first VHSs started coming out, and people still haven't got their heads around that. As a parent, you should take a little bit of responsibility for your child's viewing. And that's not to say that you stop them watching certain things, but if you do watch it with them and kind of help them to learn how to appreciate these films, what they are, what's going on in them, and what the issues are kind of surrounding those things. Obviously, there's certain things that you don't want to show a kid, but I think it's a much more healthy kind of attitude to really sort of embrace a wider range of stuff. It's like drinking alcohol in some respect. If you're kind of introduced to alcohol in a certain way, you're less likely to become a raging alcoholic. He says with a beer in his hand. I think most fans of Video Nasties don't really like earlier decades of horror exploitation. I notice this a lot. People complaining Arrow did a box set of 50s monster flicks. It's possibly true. I think it's as much to do with the aesthetics of the 40s, 50s, 60s early 60s that is, but certainly 40s, 50s horror films, is that they had a certain look. And one of the interesting crossovers is obviously H.G. Lewis? Yeah, Blood Feast and all that kind of stuff. It was. Sorry, for some reason in my head the name got stuck. And it is a very different vibe. It's a very different kind of feel. And it's also, part of the kind of progression of these various things. Is a lot of modern audiences would struggle to watch a lot of the low-budget horror films and stuff from the 80s these days. Just kind of how it is. Think about music and stuff. How much 20s, 30s music would you listen to? Some guy going that very kind of quaint night, sort of like 1930s, 1940s kind of way. Rock and roll as well. You look at 50s and 1950s sort of rock and roll. It's not the same beast as it is these days. But you can learn to appreciate that stuff. I think that's what's important. It's not expecting everybody to kind of like all of it. I'm not a big fan of the Universal monsters, particularly. I don't find them particularly interesting. But then, I could have said the same about like the westerns and stuff like that, and now I'm watching a bunch of spaghetti westerns because I feel in a place where I'm kind of wanted to watch that. So films like Werewolf vs. Yeti or Night of the Bloody Apes are more throwback films with more gore thrown in. Pretty much. Yeah, absolutely. They've got that earlier kind of vibe. I think they do. But it is a weird crossover though, isn't it? When you kind of like look at it. Well, not weird, but kind of very apparent sort of crossover. So I find it kind of fascinating to look at that when you watch the changes. But that is why, the 1970s was such a seismic shift in horror, because then you were getting all those kind of various films like Last House on the Left and Clockwork Orange and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all those kind of films, and Night of the Living Dead, which really did change the dynamic. Herschel Gordon Lewis was kind of like a pioneer in some respects of that kind of stuff. Then Mary Whitehouse was wreaking havoc on the view in public. Yes, she was. Have you seen Duck You Sucker yet, Glenn? No, I haven't. No. I haven't seen that. I should. Maybe I should. What comes to spaghetti westerns, do not watch Django's Cut Price Corpses. Guess who made it? Death Wish 2 is still cut in the UK and USA, but it's uncut in Australia. It's still cut in the USA? Really? Okay. Anyway, without further ado, I think we ought to kick off, because I said half an hour, it's actually 3/4 of an hour we've been carrying on. We shall have a look at the Jess Franco collection. I have behind me, these are just the DVDs and Blu-rays that I've got. Bear in mind that doesn't represent the entirety of my collection. That is just the kind of, shall we say, legit versions that I've got. I do have probably about another 20 odd at least of bootlegs of films that were otherwise unavailable. There's a whole bunch of them which I would like, which haven't either been kind of translated or given subtitles, that kind of stuff. But there is also a lot of stuff which has just been released fairly recently. So, yeah. Even the 30s Universal film Murders in the Zoo, which had someone having their lips sunshine. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was a bunch of earlier stuff in Lewis as well. But his is the most kind of like, I think, the most recognisable, probably. But yeah, let's have a bit of a shufty at these things then. So we'll start off with that. These will be in no particular order. I do warn you. I've not put them into date order or anything like that. But yeah. Okay. So this is a double pack. I actually got it mostly for Devil's Island lovers. It came with Night of the Assassins because it's the only version I could get, but it meant 2 for the price of 1. So Neither of these films are particularly notable. Devil's Island Lovers is actually the better of the two. It's not an awful film, but it is a little tedious. Night of the Assassins is a little bit of a struggle, but it's not a bad story. But it takes a little bit more kind of work to appreciate. But for certain, I've got no idea where the hell I'm going to put all these as I go through them. But yeah, so it's not a bad little package actually. The DVDs are pretty good quality. It's Tartan Grindhouse, so they made a good run at it. Night of the Assassins, like I say, it's not translated. It's subtitled as well. So you've got a slow Jess Franco film with subtitles. It took me a couple of stabs to get through that one. Recently watched Night of the Assassins. Not good. It's not the most easy. You have to, if you give it a couple of tries, if you're willing to give it a couple of tries, then the story does start coming out. I do remember it being incredibly confusing. It's really hard to keep up with everything. You know, it's because it's so slow. Apart from anything else, you start losing track. Not easy to sit through. So I can completely understand why you wouldn't enjoy it. I didn't particularly enjoy it. It took me a lot of effort to get through it. If I wasn't someone with a certain amount of interest in Jess Franco's films, I would have had a real hard time with that. This is actually one of the good ones, The Bloody Judge. So yeah, you got Christopher Lee in there as well. So this I think was Harry Allen Towers era, which I consider to be Jess Franco's best era. He had a budget, generally speaking, not the hugest budget, but a budget nonetheless, and good equipment, and was allowed to actually kind of exercise himself in an artistic sense as well as actually kind of as well as doing sort of just exploitation films. Harry Allen Towers, the quality of his films was generally a bit higher. It's not to say that it was always the most full-on for artistic stuff, but he did make films that were worthy of being in a cinema, put it that way. First learned about Franco from Channel 4's Eurotrash, yes. Jess Franco was despised by the BBFC. He was pretty much blacklisted, so if anything came in through their doors with Jess Franco's name on, they would have a tendency to kind of go, no, immediate throw it out, which is why not many of them kind of like were around. So yeah. Another one, just picked that up recently. Haven't had a chance to watch this Blu-ray yet, but one of the ones I've already reviewed, obviously, The Demons, which is quite good fun. It's Jess Franco doing the Witchfinder General, essentially. What's not to love about that? One for Simon here, because I know he loves both of these movies. Blood of Fu Manchu and The Castle of Fu Manchu. Jess Franco's generally his version to consider to be the worst of the Fu Manchu films. It's not particularly a series of stories that I have that much interest in, but they're quite entertaining. It's Christopher Lee again. Christopher Lee will kind of come up several times through this. He worked with Jess Franco quite a lot, so yeah, they seem to like each other enough that they can actually sort of come backwards and forwards and cross paths so many times. It's weird that Bloody Judge was marketed as a monster film in the US called Night of the Blood Monster, complete with a monster on the poster. Yes, yeah, it is weird. Yeah, it is much more a Witchfinder General film, and there's a few of them Jess Franco did, which was kind of that ilk. Witchfinder General really did spawn a lot of imitators. Eurotrash was always good for a bit of filth. Yes, it was. A Demons and Unsploitation. Tempted to buy it soon, seeing as it's really cheap for a Blu-ray. Yeah, that's not a bad little version either. Nucleus Films. There's a whole bunch of special extras on there. You probably won't be able to read that, but It's a nice presentation. Next one, Vampiros Lesbos. Certainly one of the more artistically solid films of Jess Franco. It's not his most, but it's certainly getting up that way. It's got Soledad Miranda in. It was sort of days when he was a little bit more sort of sober about his erotic content. For all the praise I give to Lena Romay, a lot of the films that he kind of had her in were a lot more frivolous, and this really does sort of kind of delve into a what they always call a psychosexual story, which I think is a fair enough description. It just feels a little bit kind of weird, apart from anything else, to describe it that way. But yeah, it's in the days when he was basically doing a lot of films when that were kind of a very deeply psychological nature, but with obviously that very strong kind of focus on sexual desire and power, to the point that I kind of watch a lot of those films, and you get this feeling that Franco is both in awe and scared of, almost kind of terrified of female sexuality. Vampiros Lesbos and House of Lost Women are my favourite from Franco. Vampiros Lesbos is high up there, but we'll get to the one that I think is my favourite. But this one is The Girl from Rio. It's been riffed by riff tracks. It's that kind of movie. It's a sort of It feels almost like Austin Powers was less James Bond than it was this film. It really does. There's it's worth a watch. Harry Alan Towers era, so you got nice quality shooting and all that kind of stuff. But it's a completely frivolous story. It's kind of fun. I think the only Franco film you've ever seen is Bloody Moon. Watch, depends on how serious a film you want, really. But well, we'll get to it in a bit anyway. Venus in Furs, watch out. X312 Flight to Hell. I was very surprised I could actually get hold of this. It's a bit of an action adventure. There's drugs and diamonds, that kind of stuff. So you got good guys, bad guys, all that kind of thing. It's not massively impressive. It doesn't really kind of fall into the Jess Franco's lowest tier, but it's not a billion miles off. It really is low kind of mid-scale to kind of upper low scale for Franco. One which I want to get an updated version because it's out on Blu-ray now, but Jess Franco's Faceless. Which, if I remember rightly, it's been such a long time since I've seen it, but it kind of has that eyes without a face sort of motif going on it. Marie Lillachal. God, her name's tough sometimes. It's Marie, not Maria, I think. But yeah, sorry, not trying to be petty, but Dracula's Daughter. Jess Franco's went through a period of doing a lot of gothic kind of stuff. For his gothic stuff, that's kind of his classic era, really. So if you like the Jess Franco gothic stuff, it's really kind of that era that you want to be looking at. Alright. You guess which one that is? It's the Greek version. It's Diamonds of Kilimanjaro. A deeply average jungle adventure type thing with obviously bare-breasted Amazonian women. Thanks, Jess. Female vampire. And not a bad one. It's not the most interesting. It's very slow, as I remember. I don't remember a heck of a lot about it, to be honest with you. But it's got Lena Romay in it, so that's always a bit of a bonus. But yeah, I don't remember taking too badly to this one. Also, not really kind of up there. It's one of those very, very kind of like middling Jess Franco ones. Not one that you would show to someone who wasn't a fan. It's Faceless out on Blu-ray in the UK. I don't know if it's out in the UK, but there is a Blu-ray release of it. I think it's Severin off the top of my head. What cuts as the female vampire copy cut? I'm not entirely sure. It's one of the problems with Jess Franco's films is a lot of his films have come out with multiple titles and multiple cuts. We will be discussing some of that with some of the other stuff, but this is a 101-minute cut, if that means anything. But I don't know. I mean, I never really went into too much detail with the wide variety of cuts, because otherwise you'd end up losing your friggin' mind. The guy did a lot of movies. It's very difficult to keep track of. One I haven't watched yet, which is The Sadist Baron von Klaus. And one I started but didn't quite get through was Cecilia. Both fairly recent pickups. So there's this label Black Maison Rouge and Black House. I'm pretty sure they're the same company. But yes, they release a whole bunch of these. I don't know what it is that Jess Franco's films have suddenly got a lot of attention. Maybe, it's people like me making videos on his stuff. But yeah, Franco hated Romina Power. Said she was the worst actor he ever worked with. Oh, you mean on Devil Hunter? Is it on Devil Hunter? Yeah, she is pretty damn awful. I mean, dubbing aside, one I just watched recently, Shining Sex, actually kind of like. It starts off. It is a Eurocine film. That's another era of Jess Franco's stuff. Is the Eurocine stuff. Shining Sex is one of the more troubled Jess Franco films in terms of getting a release and stuff like that. It got a lot of controversy in plenty of countries. Partly because there is full-on kind of sexual activity within the film, so there was very difficult to get hold of an uncut version. It is a goofy film in some respects, but it does actually kind of like have some very interesting things going on within it. It certainly starts off feeling like a very bog standard kind of Eurocine, I should say, really kind of had like two eras. They were always a bit cheap and a bit kind of frivolous, but the latter half really was where it got even cheaper and even more frivolous in some respects. But they always had good cameras. But yeah, it's an interesting little film that kind of like starts off very frivolous and then sort of approaches some interesting ideas with a little bit of a nod and a wink. Oh, right, okay. Actually, I think what you're saying about the worst actress was the one that was in... let me see if I can find it. Where are we? So. Now, I know this lass... Ursula Fellner. Or Buchfellner, I think was her full name. Jess Franco certainly said that she was one of the worst that he's ever worked with. So I don't know if you're confusing it or whether he's actually been quoted as saying these two people. But she's holy fuck. But we'll get back to that. She was pretty bad. Demoniac. And you can tell what it's supposed to be kind of like ripping off a bit. I don't think that was a particularly remarkable film, but it's not one of his worst. There's a lot of that with Jess Franco. There's a lot of... if you're a fan of Jess Franco, it's passable, but if you weren't, really struggle with it, to be quite honest with you. Of course, Jack the Ripper. One of the earlier collection box sets. So I've got... Yeah, so I essentially ended up with 2 copies, because there's that. I don't know how I managed to do that, to be quite honest with you, but yeah. But I got that box set, which these are going for a pretty penny these days. I've seen these go for quite a lot of money. The second one is a Jess Franco Collection 2, which is very hard to get hold of. And when you can find it, it's like stupidly expensive. Oh, okay. I'll take your word for that on Kieran. But yeah, I know there's a few that you really didn't. At least 1 or 2 you didn't really like. But you're going to do that, especially when you make as many films as Jess Franco did. Justine is Franco's longest proper film, a little over 2 hours. Yeah, he didn't really have 2. I don't know if it's the longest. Is it the longest? It may well be. It may well be. Yeah, because I don't think Venus and Furs is terribly long, is it? That's 83 minutes. Yeah, you're probably right. Just talked about power and a mum sharing a boyfriend, probably. Yes, anyway. I won't put that past Jess Franco just being a bit cheeky and having a bit of a dig. It's quite possible he was right, though. Okay, so in the box set, Voodoo Passion. Bit of a daft film. It's kind of the theme of this particular box set. This is really kind of like Jess Franco's, by and large, Jess Franco's more frivolous kind of era. It's really kind of one of those that even when it's not doing the sexy stuff, sounds like a porno. But I mean, that's the thing with Jess Franco, though. He does a lot of that kind of stuff. He's very playful with it. He doesn't seem to mind that kind of thing. So he'll do the sexy time, then he'll actually kind of like, care enough to put a story around it that is actually a story, which is not what a lot of porn films would do. So Sexy Sisters, pretty much more of the same. Women in Prison film, not the most interesting. Love Letters of a Portuguese Nun. I seem to remember that was actually quite an interesting film. Not massively so, but actually not a bad film either. More Women in Prison. Well, Love Camp. He liked his... I was going to say he liked his Women in Prison films. I think he did, but it was very much riding a wave. And that is one of the things with the European exploitation scene, particularly when it came to Eurocine, is they would try to cotton onto what is kind of popular at the time, then just churn out as much shit as possible. It's actually the Italian film industry in a nutshell for the most part. For all the lauding of Italian filmmaking history, it spent a lot of time chasing Hollywood or whatever happened to be popular at the time, and they would often kind of like make several different versions for different regions and stuff like that. And there's a few of the films down there which we'll get to that kind of certainly follow up on that sort of thing. Barbed Wire Dolls, pretty much bog standard women in prison film, not massively interesting. Ilsa the Wicked Warden, it kink. It's pure kink. Oh dear. Was on a TV show in the 80s where us kids all interviewed Mary Whitehouse. Oh wow. There was an opportunity. I hope you didn't waste it. Blue Rita. Another kind of erotic one. Actually, not one of the bad ones. As much as I remember that. they kind of blur into each other. Most of this stuff that I'm showing you I've reviewed already anyway, so if you want the kind of in-depth look at these movies, then by all means jump over to the Francophile playlist on my page. And then of course Jack the Ripper again. Managed to get 2 copies. Because I'm an idiot. Sometimes you either forget or you kind of lose track of what you got. Certainly when you've got as many bloody DVDs as I have, and I know a bunch of you have got a lot more than I have. Speaking of Italian filmmaking, anyone seen Argento's recent release? I haven't, but I am very keen to. Yes, the spaghetti westerns, yes, is another example of the Italians kind of co-opting other countries' trends. But they would do it a lot with not just, if Jaws comes out, so the European exploitation scene would crank out fuck tons of shark movies, and Exorcist comes out, then I think Jess Franco would make one or whatever. There'd be a whole bunch of those. The most original when it came to doing those kind of movies was probably one of the more original ones was the Cannibal films. That's very Italian. It's very Italian. So, getting into some of what I consider to be Jess Franco's most interesting period, again, Harry Alan Towers era, Eugenie. Again, we've got some very familiar faces in there. Marie Little Dejal, Christopher Lee is in that. Amusing story about that is that Christopher Lee, towards the end of this movie, there's a kind of orgy going on, and Christopher Lee's kind of like in the midst of this thing, not getting it on or anything, but he's this sort of weird, mysterious master of ceremonies type thing. And he always claimed that he didn't know that that was the kind of film it was, that he never saw any of that stuff. You go, you're right in fucking shot, dude. Come on. You wouldn't say that to his face, it'd probably break your neck. He was a bit of a badass, was Christopher Lee. He was a real gentleman, he wouldn't do that either. Justine. So Romina Power, Maria Rome, Klaus Kinski, Jack Palance. That's the thing, is another one of the classic Western actors, spaghetti Western actors. But Jack Palance and that. Which is kind of cool. Not a bad little version, that either. Blue Underground. The classic, my favourite, Venus in Furs. Maria Rom. Harry Alan Towers era. And what I think is absolutely his best movie. It's the most solid, it's the most artistically coherent. It's got a fascinating story to it, and it's all done in that really kind of heavy psychological fog that he was so good at doing, but didn't always get the chance to do properly. Yes, Eugenie has always been the Franco film I go back to time and time again. Yeah, it is one of those which is really kind of like shows what Jess Franco can do. This is the best example for me, is Venus in Furs, of just what Jess Franco was actually kind of capable of when he had the right circumstances. And that was really, I think, before he started getting kind of like, blacklisted by people. Because he just got a bad name with censors around the world, and they were like, Jess Franco? No. He had so many pseudonyms he would use to try and hide the fact that it was him. Another great one, She Killed in Ecstasy. Soledad Miranda again. Paul Muller. Another one of the Franco family, because Franco was one of those guys, one of those directors. He'd like to have a lot of his friends around. He would always have kind of familiar faces, as much as he could. So he's no different to kind of like the likes of David Lynch in that respect. always, as much as possible, would get the same people back because he knew he could rely on them, really. Venus and Furs is absolutely incredible, inspired by a story from Chet Baker and Franco wanted Miles Davis to star in it. Now, the thing with this thing is Barbara McNair, who's the girlfriend in this, right? Maria Rom's character is not she's a love interest, but she's kind of like almost like the thing that drags James Darren's character away from Barbara McNair. Barbara McNair, for those who don't know, is a black lady for one thing. Jess Franco wanted her to actually be the central character within the movie, and he just wasn't allowed to do that, so he had to kind of whittle her part down and change it and that kind of stuff. But Barbara McNair that's her there. She's fantastic in this. She's absolutely fantastic. Everybody's fantastic in this. It's really such a solid movie. But Jess Franco was kind of like rather upset that she wasn't able to be the central character, but he still had to go ahead and make the movie. She's a ghost, mate. Yes, I know. But you don't know that throughout the film, not until later on. At least it's not necessarily apparent until later on. Isn't She Killed in Ecstasy a sort of remake of Vampirus Lesbos? Jess Franco did remake a whole bunch of the various things, but I don't... No, it's not. It's not quite like that. It might be partly their case, but it's not a direct copy as far as I'm aware. Some of these I haven't seen in a long time, so I can't remember the details of the story. I'd have to watch them back to back to see. One of the interesting ones, again, Harry Allen Tower era, 99 Women. Now that's actually one of the women in prison films that I think is actually really quite good. It's got Mercedes McCambridge in it, apart from anything else, who voiced Reagan in the Reagan monster Pazuzu before he became Pazuzu in The Exorcist. Maria Rome in it again. It's a very solid women in prison film. It's got a decent story to it. It's not one of the more kind of titillating ones. It does have a little bit of kind of that stuff in it, but it's not one of the ones that just feels that that's all it's there for. So there is a decent story in there, that kind of thing. There was a couple of different versions. The French version is notorious because it is the one with the hardcore footage in it. So they call it's like the extended cut. But it was Bruno Mattei. Essentially was tasked with filming some hardcore scenes to be inserted into this. This is not that version. I have got a bootleg of the French version. And it's awful. It's just not worth it because it's just everything's running along. And it's really nicely shot, this film. Do not get me wrong. This is a really nicely shot film. It looks great. Sounds great. The locations are fantastic and all that kind of stuff. It's very consistent and coherent until you hit some of those hardcore scenes. And it's like, So it goes... Movie, hardcore scenes. Like it's almost like a hard cut. It's like somebody just took a pair of scissors, went snip, right, stick it in there, slap some tape on, run it, and it's no recognisable characters that are involved in this thing. It doesn't make sense in the running of the story because nothing's led up to this thing. They're in the wrong costumes. The lighting's different. The film stock's different. So Bruno Mattei, for the French version of it, the French extended version of this film, utterly ruined it. But the original, Jess Franco's version is much, much better. Everett says, I think Franco's earlier black and white films are the ones that often get overlooked. Yes, it's very true. But I think some of his best work, Awful Dr. Orloff, Death Whistles, The Blues, yeah. Yeah, I think it's when, because as he went along, he had more and more problems because the certain types of films he was making. I have seen kind of like discussion on, part of it was his relationship with Lena Remay. She was, I think she was like 17 when they kind of started working together. I don't think they'd got together at that point, at least because they didn't marry till very late. But I think the rumour mill went round, whether or not he was, but I think they were both kind of age of consent and all that kind of stuff. But there was a real problem with him being blacklisted for various things, and not least in places like Britain, where the BBFC went, "Well, you made this porno movie over here, so therefore we're not touching you." Yeah, Caligula was like that, Glenn. Yes and no. It doesn't feel quite as bad in Caligula as it does in 99 in 99 Women. That was really bad, but I totally get your point. Just inserted the orgy scenes in a. There was always a bit of that in the actual film, though, and then they kind of spliced in bits. Even so, but that movie will. Which one are you looking at? When I see Maria Rome, and because she was married to Harry Towers, I tell myself, well, he probably had an outstanding personality. Yeah, but there's also, she would appear nude, but she wouldn't be doing kind of like, anything particularly explicit either. So I think there was a limitation on that kind of thing. But Maria Rome, Franco really did have a kind of obsession with her. He really knew how to shoot her really, really well. A stunning woman. Absolutely stunning woman. I don't believe those Christopher Lee spy stories. He did a lot. He was involved with a lot of stuff. And as far as I'm aware, it's all verifiable. So, even oh god, what was it he was talking about? I think he was talking about somebody being hung, and telling her. I think it was. I think it was Peter Jackson telling them that that's not how it's the noise a man makes when they're being strangled or something. Oh, stabbed, wasn't it? I think it was really, yeah. When you stab a guy, that's not what it sounds like. Yeah. I think stories grew with telling, but some seem to be true. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of embellishment probably in there, but he was involved with some pretty heavy stuff in his military career. I don't know if she was in a Franco movie, but Laura Gemser was always a favourite of mine. No, I think she spent most of her time working with kind of likes of Joe D'Amato, not. Although for some reason it's just niggling in the back of my head that maybe she did something with Franco. Christopher Lee was the inspiration for James Bond. His cousin was Ian Fleming. Yeah, I have heard that. But yeah. Anyway, moving on. More Women in Prison, Sadomania. Fun enough. Take it for what it is. It's certainly one of the more infamous ones of Jess Franco's Women in Prison movies. And certainly one of the more amusing ones in some respects, because it's like Jess Franco's Women's Prison usually involves the uniform, including the guards a lot of the time, is topless. How anyone can take these films seriously and be offended by them, it's just you see just that element of it, and it's like kind of okay. It's a Jess Franco film. One of the reasonably decent ones actually is Women Behind Bars. Jess Franco really did actually kind of a lot of the women in prison stuff, but did them fairly well. I apologise, my chair is making a right old racket. So, speaking of the porn, and I shall not show you the back of this because it will... that could give me a flag. Jess Franco's Passion. Sister movie to Jess Franco's Perversion. So there's two of these in these really kind of weird sort of puffy boxes. Not terribly practical. And not cheap either. It's not terribly good. It is pretty much Jess Franco doing porn. Three very connected films with Jeanine Reynaud. So the first two were made back to back. So Kiss Me Monster and Sadist Erotica. Part of the Red Lips films. Now there was the first one was Labios Roujos, which is not available in English language, doesn't have any subtitles. It's only barely available at all, if you can still get hold of it. It's just Franco being very frivolous and making a lot of having a lot of fun. They're kind of good fun, these films. They're silly. They're silly, kind of just joyously fun little films with two kind of fun girls in the lead. But then there's like Succubus as well, which is not really it's not a follow-on to any of those. I mean, those two are kind of linked by the Red Lips Detective Agency. But there is this one, which it's such a long time since I've seen this one. A bit more of a serious film, generally speaking. Kind of more in his more leaning towards kind of like sex, murder, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I have reviewed, like I say, that one. So I'm trying to think of the Erotic Rites of Frankenstein, I think, is one of the titles of this. Obviously, it's not an English language DVD case, but it does have the English language soundtrack. Not bad. Probably one of the more kind of entertaining of that era of Jess Franco's horror films. It's perfectly fine. If I remember rightly, Lena Romay doesn't have a massive role in that. She's kind of flits in and out of it. New Blu-ray of Je Brûle de Partout. Sold out within 4 hours. Okay. Succubus was the one Ebert said was one of the worst of the year. Yeah, I always have to take Ebert with a pinch of salt, to be quite honest with you. Sometimes he said some really kind of decent stuff, and other times he was just being a dick. He was entertaining, though. I'll give him that much. But when it came to exploitation films, he was not a fan. And you always got to remember that when he approaches those kind of things. Yeah, I put an error in the title. I'll correct it later. Well, thanks for pointing it out. Yeah, I'm a dick. I can't type for toffee. Itchy schnoz. I think I got a little bit of hay fever. There's a story that during the making of Howling 2, Czech army laid on full military ban when he arrived due to being involved with the assassination of Rhino. Okay. Yeah. I just found my Region 1 Vampiris Lesbos, and She Killed in Ecstasy on Synapses DVD. Very good. A young woman with Frankenstein's claw. Yeah. But I think it's Erotic Rites of Frankenstein was one of the English language titles, if I remember rightly. Met Malcolm McDowell at HorrorCon, and someone asked him about the director of Caligula. Malcolm said he could start by making a fucking good film. Didn't Ebert have involvement with Valley? He was the writer of Valley of the Dolls. Yeah, and it was an awful movie by all accounts. Redemption Kino Lord released the best cut of Erotic Rites here in the States. Oh, okay, fair enough. Ebert wasn't a fan of exploitation, but he shared his career writing a movie with Russ Meyer. Yeah, it's fine when he did it. He could be a bit of a snob sometimes, could he? But Oh, I think generally speaking, Everett, he for the most part, if it could be described as an exploitation film, he hated it. I think a few sort of piqued his interest. I think Halloween and stuff like that, he kind of let go, but I don't think he would describe it as necessarily being an exploitation film. But if he thought, if he judged a film to be exploitative, then he would automatically hate it. He would really kind of like a bit judgmental on that front, but yeah. So I've got a couple of the later ones here. Nightmares Come at Night. I think that was one of the later ones. No, maybe not. Maybe it was a bit earlier. 1970. Yeah, so it's not. But yeah. Honestly, don't remember too much of that. I think it was kind of middling for Jess Franco. This is definitely one of the later ones. There is a second Vampire Killer Barbies film that he did, but it's very hard to find. Kind of good fun. It's shot on digital, because by this point Franco was struggling with mobility and all that kind of stuff. So to carry on filming, he decided to go digital, apart from anything else, because it's cheap as well, but you can actually pick up a digital camera, whereas a film camera was a lot harder. Wouldn't say that. No, what I'm doing. Nightmares Come at Night. No shit. That seems to be one of his favourite movies was Dark City. He did a commentary on it. The other one he did was Citizen Kane. Okay, yeah. One of the more fascinating ones, at least kind of on paper, is Night of the Eagles. And if I can get this where it's not reflecting, Christopher Lee and Mark Hamill. It's Luke Skywalker in a Jess Franco film. That's just weird. It's not a most interesting film. It's actually shot quite nicely. I'll give it that much. It is shot quite nicely. But it's weird. This really is kind of very much sort of melodrama kind of territory. And it's just weird. I have commented on it before. The weird thing about it is you look at it and it's like Nazis and all that kind of stuff, right? So you think it's going to be a kind of wartime epic. It's only really in the background. Essentially, there's this sort of love triangle going on. And it's like, it's kind of weird because it's really sort of like focusing on this love triangle, which you kind of go, fine, but why have you decided to make the characters Nazis? Wouldn't you kind of make it the Allies? I don't know why he did it. Why he didn't make it an Allies kind of thing, because there's certain dynamics of what's going on with the characters as Nazis, but you can kind of like go, well, what? I'm not quite sure what the reason for you choosing that is, because it's weird. Because you're supposed to be rooting for at least one of these guys, Although you got like the committed Nazi and the one who's like kind of like just more patriotic than he is, aligned with the ideals of these people. But it is one of those that Jess Franco really kind of drops the ball on, sort of explaining why it is we should actually be kind of watching these people. Yeah, I think he could have made a better story if he'd reframed everything. Have you got Lorna the Exorcist? No, I don't, actually. I have seen that kind of knocking around. Recently stumbled upon Esmeralda Bay, a Franco film from the late 80s starring George Kennedy and Robert Forster. What the hell? I'm going to have to just make a note of that, because that's not one I've heard of. What was it? Esmeralda Bay. Is it Countdown to Esmeralda Bay? Yes, it is. Okay. It's one of the later ones, which is probably why I've not heard of it. The later films, when you're talking about like kind of like the 90s into the early 2000s, a lot of those films are really quite hard to get hold of. But I will definitely dig that one out. Not a DVD, but Jess Franco CD. That's one thing that people don't kind of think about Jess Franco with. Is the fact that he actually is a musician, or was a musician. Very into his jazz. It's kind of an interesting little album. I'm not a big jazz fan. I kind of got it because I want to own a Jess Franco CD. Yeah. I'm 45, waited my whole adult life to find someone to talk about Franco films. Always loved the Francophile videos on this channel, but never had time to chat until now. Well, you're very welcome. I love the Franco stuff. There's not many people who are kind of like, willing to sit through enough of the movies for me to talk to them about it. It's kind of why I did the Francophile thing, and I'm going to have to do some Francophile stuff. I'm going to try and get something done over the summer, to be honest with you. I need to get 2 or 3 videos done over the summer. I really, really, really do. I know I'm really lacking on that stuff, but there's plenty of Franco stuff out now, so I might help myself to them. Awful Dr. Orloff and Virgin Among the Living Dead. I'm not a massive one for the Orloff films, but as was said earlier, there are people who really do appreciate those. Virgin Among the Living Dead I really do like. It's an interesting one because it is really kind of Franco doing his full-on psychosexual kind of stuff, and it's very psychologically based, the film. Everything's kind of skewed towards the psychology of the central character, and I really, really do love that. Google Gobble, one of us, yes. And the last few, which are really kind of the ones. Although I'm going to start with a couple of, shall we say, marginal ones. Cannibal Terror and Zombies Lake, or Zombie Lake. Now you're going, they're not Jess Franco films. Jess Franco wrote them, or was involved with them to some extent. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't realise is, certainly with Eurocine, it was a kind of weird sort of network. So when it came to like Zombies Lake, for instance, right? So this is not a good film, to say the least. But Jess Franco was supposed to have been writing to direct this, and then he pulled out at the last minute, I think, due to some weird demands, or kind of like some demand that he didn't find acceptable, or he wasn't going to get something, or the budget was really, really low. That he kind of pulled out of it, and then another director sort of stepped in, and it's worked the other way with Franco. Somebody's dropped out of the movie and Franco's walked in, and that's another one that Franco was involved in writing. So there's a couple of them, and you can tell. Thing is, with that film, there's a whole bunch of footage which is in that, which is also in that film. Cannibals. Right, if I can get that close enough to the camera, let me put this other one down. Right, so look at that fella there, and the fella on the cover there. So there's this weird sort of incestuous almost kind of thing that goes on with these movies, and that really is kind of like Eurocine in a nutshell, and probably during their shall we say cinematically less interesting era. That's not Oasis of the Zombies, is it? I do have a copy of Oasis of the Zombies, but not a legitimate one. It is one I have actually been meaning to get hold of. Bear in mind, the ones that I don't have legit copies of were either unavailable or incredibly expensive or very difficult to get hold of at the time that I did the reviews and stuff like that. Certainly back in the Nasty's Review era. That was kind of a problem for me to get hold of a lot of those movies. Particularly because most distributors didn't know who the hell Jess Franco was anyway. So, and just knew that if they'd seen his stuff or knew of his stuff, they weren't likely to go out and distribute it, because they'd be like, well, who's going to be interested in that? Devil Hunter. And that could just as well have been made back to back with that. In fact, I can't remember exactly when those two films sort of happened, but there's a lot of similarities. I think that was the one that had the Ooga Booga white goddess thing going on. You could not do it these days. They're not Franco films. No, they're not. I got one of his comedy porn films. Oh, have you really? That I would like to see. Is that even available these days, or is that just kind of one of those rarities that you manage to get? Candy Coast, yeah, Lena Romeo, she had plenty of pseudonyms as well, but she was so happy just to jump into a sex film. God bless her. Rest in peace, lass. You see Bloody Moon, yes you do. I can understand why it's your favourite. It is one of those films that is so bad it's good. I mean, it is acted really awfully. The story isn't particularly fascinating, but it is shot quite well. But there's comedy moments like that big styrofoam boulder that falls down. It's a huge change. It's weird because she's running along this coast. Then suddenly the scenery all changes and there's a rolling boulder behind her that's clearly made of styrofoam or something like that. It's a terrible film, but it's so much fun. And it was that one, wasn't it, with the shake your baby, shake your baby. I seem to remember putting a little comment at the end of the video saying cynical celluloid does not endorse the shaking of babies. Thank you, John. Lena Romay, bless her. She always struck me as a lovely, lovely woman, and one of the things about her, she just seemed to enjoy so much, kind of like being Jess Franco's muse. Those two had from what I can tell, an absolutely loving relationship from the moment that they met, and they're just absolutely aligned in purpose and interest. And what a wonderfully charismatic woman she was as well. Even in some of the shittiest roles she was in, there's always something about her that was just utterly endearing. But yeah. But Bloody Moon is bloody great. It is a fun film. I have a really kind of nasty sort of knockoff VHS of it. And bear in mind... Where did it go? Are you around? It's somewhere. But I have basically a kind of... I was ripped off on eBay, basically. It was an absolute fucking copy, but it looks quite good on the shelf. It is one of those shelf filler ones. Not by design. I wanted the original cassette, but there you go. Saw a part of an interview with Franco and Romay in which they said they were Catholics. Very strange, that. I think it was probably a default kind of thing. But, they were very... both of them were very, very sexually liberated people. Franco's relationship to sex is, when he explores it in the films, ranges from the most frivolous to some very provocative and very interesting ideas. You'd look at how his female protagonists use sex within the stories, sometimes to ensnare and to draw hapless men to their deaths. It sounds like a very silly thing in, kind of when you say it, because it's a bit tee-hee-hee-hee, but it's actually kind of fascinating, because I think it speaks to some degree of his fascination with women and his relationship to sex and how much power a woman has over a man. That's the thing. It's like, because a lot of the women characters within his films, he seems to always show an awful lot more respect than people kind of imagine. Just because, he shows a lot of them naked doesn't mean he doesn't have the utmost respect. He's fascinated by women. He's very attracted to women, drawn to them. But he's almost kind of like it's like he's aware that the sexual allure of a woman can get you into a lot of trouble. It can lead you astray to your death. I think it's such a fascinating... You don't really notice that necessarily as a viewer until you watch a load of his films, particularly his better films, which kind of tackle sexual subjects, or at least kind of like that's part of the story, that these female characters can manipulate all these hapless men with their allure. The Catholic Church did dub him the most dangerous filmmaker alive. Dear, oh dear. Oh dear. You're just a bad Catholic if you try to leave. Well, you consider if the Catholic Church is like kind of like, oh, he's so dangerous, and you're kind of like, well, okay, you're the Catholic Church. I don't remember Jess Franco getting into hot water about too much in that sort of regard. Not in the way that the Catholic Church does. I think his relationship with sex is a heck of a lot more healthy than the Catholic Church's is. But yeah. So one more. That one I showed earlier, Devil Hunter. Again, something of a guilty pleasure. It is a terrible film on so many respects, but it's kind of fun. You've got the zombie with the big ping pong eyes, and you have that drinking game that I created where it's basically every time you see his pants, when you see his kind of trunks in shot, then you have to take a sip. Because he's supposed to be completely naked. In the wide shots, he's completely naked, but it's when they do the close-ups, you keep seeing a little bit of Speedos. Ah, dear. Wish the church would dub myself the most dangerous anything. John, have you ever seen his seen Takeshi's Castle, Most Extreme Eliminations? Dear. But yeah, that, I mean, aside from the stuff I've got on my hard drive and things like that, is the Jess Franco legit selection. I do have a lot of a number of the, shall we say, the more rare, hard to find stuff, and the stuff which you wouldn't be able to buy in this country because it wouldn't even make it into a sex shop. But there's things like The Girl with Transparent Panties, which is one of the most hilarious titles that I know of. There's also the film We Are 18 Years Old, and a whole bunch of them. Sexual Story of O, which is obviously a kind of like take on the story of O. A whole bunch of stuff which is on the hard drive, and a lot of stuff which I can't really sort of review as part of anything because it's hardcore pornography. What am I gonna do? But yeah, I think over the summer I've got to get a couple of Jess Francophile stuff done, and I think I'll probably start with Night of the Eagle if I'm going to do another one. I do miss that series a bit. It's kind of it's a good one, and there aren't many series out there that really kind of focus on his stuff. So At least it's one of the more original parts of what I did. AIDS, the 20th Century Plague. Yes, that's the one that I always kind of like to say is the holy grail of Jess Franco movies. But short of going over to Eurocine and breaking into their vaults and seeing if we can find it, I don't think we'll ever get to see that. Yeah, Al Cliver's in that one. The classic Al Cliver. Who, as I understand it, is a really nice guy. Kind of active on social media. And a lot more animated in real life than he is in most of his movies. But yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that was kind of fun, because people have asked about stuff like that before, so I thought it'd be worth having a bit of a run through and seeing what we got. And of course we got to talk a little bit about the I Spit on Your Grave debacle. Will we ever see an uncut version in this country? I'm of the school of thought that I think in 10-15 years maybe, but not for a while. BBSC really do have a hard on for that stuff. See, now as I understand it, Age of the 20th Century Plague is actually a complete film. I think it is actually a complete film. So it's not like a lot of Jess Franco's stuff, which is just not kind of like it's either lost or it's incomplete. Because you look at the list of the films, if I can find it. Do I have? Let me have a look. Right. Okay. Can I? No, it's not going to do that on there. Tell you what I'll do. Should be able to go. Oh no! Come on. Get in there. There we go. Right. So what you're seeing below is the Wikipedia entry for Jess Franco's movies, which I've used to try and track whatever I've got to actually kind of find. And it's impossible to complete this because there are so many of these films that are just absolutely unavailable. It's like Queen of the Tabarin Club. I don't know if something like that is even going to be available. But We're 18 Years Old was actually kind of like his first film. Actually not a bad little film. I mean, we have watched it before, I think. Did we do a stream on that? But I have reviewed that one. Kind of an interesting one. Very quirky, very weird sense of humour. It starts off very kind of... what's the best way to say? Very frivolous and very kind of like quirky. And then it actually starts getting quite dark towards the end. It's kind of fun. I hope you've got several backups of Franco Films hard drive. I've got them on 2 different hard drives, I think, if I remember right. But I will double check that. Some of them are just a little difficult to get hold of. Not impossible. One of the sad truths, or at least kind of... one of the sad truths about a lot of Jess Franco's films that are harder to get hold of is generally you can find them on a porn site somewhere. So it's download it as quick as you can, run your virus checker and scrub the fuck out the hard drive. Because they're not the most reputable of porn sites that you have to go to either. And we're not talking something classy like Pornhub, put it that way. But yeah, so we start 1959 down here, and you just keep going and going and going and going and going. Necronomicon. Oh, no, that's okay, that's Succubus. Kiss Me Monster and Sadista Erotica, both made back to back. But as you go sort of further and further into it, it's like, okay, 1970, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75. You see how long this is going on. Inconfessable Orgies of Emmanuel. Yes, I did report. I reviewed that one. It's always interesting putting the title up on YouTube and hoping to God that they don't take exception to it. Girl with Red Lips. I think another Red Lips trilogy. Oh no, Red Lips detective agency movie. Some of them were remakes. Yeah, so we're up to 97 here, 2000, 2005, and the last film he made was Revenge of the Alligator Ladies, co-written, co-directed, co-edited by Franco and Antonio Mayans, who was a long-term collaborator. They did a lot of work together. Flowers of Perversion, Flowers of Passion. So I've got Flowers of Passion, otherwise known as just Franco's Passion. That's a big puffy case one down there. Franco made Corman look like a slacker. Well, when you consider how old and how frail he really was towards kind of like the towards the end of the 90s, he was getting pretty old by that point. And he's still like 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 films. So pretty much one a year, essentially, since 2000. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things about it. You go, I understand that he made a lot of shit. He really did. But it's a case of, to some degree, you have to kind of separate what the types of films that he was making were. Were they his films, or was he making somebody else's film? And just here, just for highlighting. There. AIDS, the 20th Century Plague. Completed but said to be lost. Produced by Emilio Larraga. Starred Lina Romay. Yeah. Definitely I want. Another one which sounds quite fun. Tribulations of a Cross-Eyed Buddha. Some of these titles, man. Did someone mention Al Cliver? Of course we mention Al Cliver. Hello, Spike. Don't know how much longer we're going to be going. We've actually been through all the Jess Franco films in my collection. So just having a quick look at this wonderful, wonderful list. And I don't know how much of this is, if there's what's missing. How complete is this? Is there more? It is incredibly difficult sometimes to really track down all of the films that he was involved in. In fact, I don't think Jess Franco knew all the films he was involved in. He'd have forgotten a load of them. Keeping on top of that has got to be kind of nuts. I do wonder how many of these Stephen Thrower, who's the most famous documenter of Franco films, or appreciator of Franco's films, I don't know how many of these he would have seen. The girl in the transparent panties, and I'm pretty sure I've got that somewhere. That is definitely one of those that you sort of end up finding on a certain type of website. I think it was more like about 190 to 200 films. It's a little difficult to appreciate, John, quite how many he did make, because the biggest confusion that there is with Jess Franco's films is they usually came with at least half a dozen titles. So keeping track of that is very, very, very difficult. How do you do it? It's like you can't. And of course there's some which are like almost pure legend, and others which are kind of like, did that happen? Were they completed? Some were abandoned before or after production. So a lot of things sort of cross over. Plus you've got the whole Eurocine kind of thing where they tend to have this crossovers. So you got movies like Zombies Lake and Cannibal Terror. where Jess Franco's involved in some respect. Did he direct certain scenes, or have they just lifted it from the footage? Eurocine were buggers for that. I never say buggers for that. They were actually quite efficient in that respect. So when you've got these two films, so basically they're shooting both of these films back to back, at the same time. And they would take footage from one film that was left over and hand it to the other director, and they would swap bits and pieces just to make this very much more efficient kind of way of completing the film for much less money. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Arch. But yeah, so it goes a Copacabana. It's weird. I go through this list, and I'm kind of sort of like I did copy this thing, and I kind of started filling out pretty much what I've seen, what I reviewed, all that kind of stuff, what I have, and it just feels like it's an impossible. Well, it is an impossible task. There are films like AIDS 20th Century Plague that you're never going to get hold of, at least not likely. I do hope that it is in Eurocine's vaults somewhere, and it eventually finds its way out. But Shining Sex was one that I didn't think I would ever get to watch, because it is one of those films that you sort of go, what distribution companies are even going to release that? But now there is this interest in Jess Franco's stuff. They're being a bit more adventurous, and the BBFC, for all their faults, for all the fact that they won't release I Spit on Your Grave uncut, have allowed us, bless them, Shining Sex in an uncut version. Now, I say uncut, I don't know if there are longer versions. That's the other dirty little secret with Jess Franco's films. They come in multiple forms. So you'll get hard uncut versions, and then kind of like, shall we say, more regionally compatible versions. It's quite sad that despite advancements in technology and platforms like Vimeo or YouTube, modern filmmakers aren't even close to the body of work Franco did. He was obsessed with filmmaking, though. That's the thing. And you could see that love in many of the films. People kind of like think, oh, he might have made one or two good films. No, the guy made a lot of very good films. But he just made a load more shit as well on top of it. And a load of stuff which is just kind of like, it's neither here nor there. It's not great, it's not bad, it's even fun. You look at Bloody Moon, it's not a great film, but it's shot pretty nicely. In fact, there's some really fantastic shots in it. The film in general is quite understandably, would be seen as being a bad film. We enjoy it though. We enjoy the fuck out of that movie, no problem. But yeah, an incredibly prolific filmmaker. I don't know too many filmmakers that can kind of match that sort of number. I don't know how many Joe D'Amato did, but I don't think he made it. He could touch Jess Franco's filmography. Bear in mind that some of the stuff on this is Jess Franco wasn't necessarily kind of like involved with directing, or kind of like, or he would have just had that thing thrown at him and he kind of just pointed cameras and stuff like that and just got the film done. But it's a big list. I mean, the guy was doing this stuff since 1959. And when he's at his best, what a great talent. And quite a charming guy as well. I always enjoy his interviews and stuff like that. Yeah. Alright. Okay. I think we're going to call it an evening there. I hope you enjoyed. Let me go back to the main thing. Unless you've got something else that you want to talk about. D'Amato made 70 odd normal films, 110, 120 pornos. Yeah, they crank pornos out, if you pardon the phrase, quite often. It's not exactly high production values. When you think about it, Franco made more movies in some entire countries. Yes, yes. Like I say, so much of it was shit, but there was an awful lot more kind of middling and a really good body of great stuff. To be honest, I think when you kind of accumulate Jess Franco's really decent films, he's got more decent films than most directors. It's raining here as well. It's about time as well. I like Franco's interviews more if I understood him better. But he could speak like about 4 different languages, I think. French, Spanish. I think he could speak Italian and English. Bit of German as well, actually, as I understand it. But he worked all over the place, but yeah. But yeah, we'll call it a day. It's been lovely to go through all those kind of things. Nice chilled out one tonight. And not next week, because I'm up at my brother's next week, but the week after. We'll have a think about what we're going to do, whether we're going to watch a movie and all that kind of stuff. And see what's going on. But yeah, this has been lovely. And to so many of you, wonderful, wonderful people in the chat. And I do apologise at the beginning. Obviously, it was very difficult for me to kind of like follow chat while I was going through all that other stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it. It is nice to do these Ramblaholics once in a while. We should do a little bit more often. I just have to pull my finger out my arse and actually come up with a subject like something like this. So, but I will bid you all a good night and have a lovely weekend, and I will see you in a couple of weeks' time after I've gone to see my brother. I'm assuming he's watching. He's probably lurking, bless him. Good night, folks. Take care. I'm going to enjoy another beer.